In 2018, Russia was set to host the 21st rendition of the FIFA World Cup. While it should have been a time of excitement and celebration for the country, the majority of Russian fans were fearing the worst. In the years leading up to the tournament, the national team had continuously underperformed, and few fans believed that 2018 would be any different, especially given the injuries sustained just prior to the tournament. The fear was that Russia would embarrass themselves on the world stage. Going into the tournament, expectations were low. All the fans wanted was a team and a tournament which they could be proud of. In the end, the Russian national team surprised everyone, bringing joy to their country and writing their names in Russian footballing history. This is the story of Russia's World Cup miracle. Prior to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, football behind the Iron Curtain was regarded amongst the best in the world. Unfortunately, while the quality of life rose for many in post-Soviet Russia, the quality of football fell dramatically. In its first World Cup as a sovereign nation in 1994, Russia failed to qualify from the group stages, finishing third in a group containing Brazil, Sweden and Cameroon. Their misery was further compounded by failure to qualify for both the France '98 World Cup and the Euros at the turn of the millennium. In 2002, Russia managed to qualify for the World Cup in the Far East, and were drawn in a group alongside Belgium, Tunisia and host Japan. Although Borneo won their first match at the tournament, their narrow loss to Japan in the next game sparked deadly riots in Moscow. Ultimately, Russia were knocked out in the first round again. By the time the 2008 European Championships in Austria and Switzerland came around, Russian fans had become accustomed to disappointment on the biggest stages. However, there was a sense that this time was different, that there was a reason to be hopeful. Zenit St. Petersburg had just won the 2008 UEFA Cup, and a new, exciting generation of Russian players were entering their primes. Led by the likes of Igor Akinfeev, the Berezutski twins, Roman Pavlyuchenko, Yuri Zhirkov and Andrei Arshavin, Gosadink's Russia qualified for the knockout round of the Euros for the first time since the fall of the USSR 17 years prior. Then, in the quarter-finals, Russia beat a star-studded Netherlands side 3-1, propelling the entire squad to legendary status. The country was in the semi-final of a major international tournament. This was undoubtedly the peak of modern Russian football. Russia eventually lost the tournament winner Spain in the semi-final, but images of Arshavin celebrating his match winner against the Dutch remain cemented in the minds of fans across the world. Emboldened by their success in 2008, Russia registered a bid to host the 2018 World Cup just 6 months later. Money was flowing into the Russian game at an increased pace, and both its club and national teams had finally begun to re-establish themselves amongst Europe's elite. A successful World Cup on home soil would only expedite this process. For many, it truly seemed that Russia was refinding its place in the footballing world, but just 2 years later, with the bidding process still ongoing, Russian football was brought back down to earth when they failed to qualify for the 2010 South African World Cup. On the 2nd of December 2010, Russia was awarded the rights to host the 2018 World Cup. Now the pressure was both on the country to host a successful World Cup and on the national team to give a decent account of themselves on home soil. As preparations for the Festival of Football continued at home, the Russian national team remained disappointing on the pitch. Though they went into the 2012 Euros as dark horses, Russia finished third in their group and were sent home early. Both the squad and manager, Dick Advocaat, came under heavy criticism in the following weeks and months, with fans alleging the failure was due to overconfidence on the part of the players. Andrei Arshavin, Russia's hero in 2008, responded to the criticism by saying, "The fact that we didn't meet your expectations is not our problem." Similar agony followed 2 years later at the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. Drawn in a group with Belgium, Algeria and South Korea, Russia left Brazil winless, having played uninspired, forgettable football. In what was a comedic yet depressing World Cup for Russia, goalkeeper Igor Akinfeev was the centre of attention, and not in a good way. First, Akinfeev had given South Korea the lead through a howler in Russia's maiden game. Then, against Algeria, Russia were on their way to the next round, but a laser pointed from the stands distracted Akinfeev, who couldn't keep out Slimani's equalising goal. Things went from bad to worse at Euro 2016 2 years later, where Borneo were completely embarrassed in every way. Not only did they finish bottom of their group playing some dismal football, Russia were also given a suspended ban from the tournament due to crowd violence against England. Scenes of violent fights between English and Russian hooligans went viral, dealing a major blow to Russia's attempts to gain soft power and subvert stereotypes about themselves through football. Back in France, star players Pavel Mamayev and Alexander Kokorin were seen lavishly partying in Monaco days after Russia's final game, nonchalant about the criticism that was coming their way. Manager Leonid Slutsky was honest in his assessment of the team. A group of players came into my room and we said with one voice, "We are shit." Russia's World Cup was only 2 years away, and it was looking like a recipe for disaster. Following the failure at the Euros, ex-Russian international goalkeeper Stanislav Cherchesov replaced Slutsky as manager. His task was not an easy one. A rebuild was badly needed by this stage. Cherchesov inherited a squad with many vulnerabilities and few obvious strengths. The Confederations Cup in 2017 was essentially a series of training matches afforded to Cherchesov as he looked to put together a respectable team for the World Cup. He mainly used 3 central defenders, matched with a style of play that attempted to provide defensive solidity. Zhirkov and Alexander Samedov were the main attacking outlet, but both were now shadows of their younger selves. The midfield was imbalanced, the defence uncertain, and star striker Smolov was left frustrated. It proved hard viewing, and Russia failed to qualify from their group. As the infrastructure at the World Cup began to come together, the Russian squad was still raw and very much a work in progress. Zenit striker Alexander Kokorin, who had been on a stellar run of form, picked up a cruciate ligament injury just a few months before the tournament, throwing a major spanner in the works. To compound issues, in defence, future Russian captain Georgy Gikia and Viktor Vasin picked up ACL tears of their own. The situation was so desperate that 38-year-old Sergei Ignashevich was brought back from retirement. After the Confederations Cup, Russia played 8 friendlies in preparation for the World Cup, winning only once, in a game which saw them defeat South Korea 4-2. These results meant Russia were the lowest ranked team at the World Cup, and had never been this far down in the FIFA rankings. The final squad saw some notable exclusions, with veterans Denis Glushikov, Dmitry Kombarov, and Igor Denisov all being left out, much to the fans' discontent. The hopes of a nation lay on the shoulders of a few players: naturalised Brazilian Mario Fernandes, star striker Fyodor Smolov, and high-performing youngsters such as the Moranchuk twins, Golovin and Zobnin. When groups were drawn, Russia were provided a glimmer of hope. Russia's favourable group would see them take on Saudi Arabia, Mohamed Salah's Egypt, and World Cup royalty Uruguay. On the 14th of June 2018, the World Cup had finally arrived. Almost a decade had passed since it was awarded to Russia, and spectators thronged the streets of the host country in keen anticipation of their country's match against Saudi Arabia. After all, it's hard not to be excited by a World Cup in your home country, and this was reflected by a packed Luzhniki stadium. Buoyed by the atmosphere of the occasion, it was impossible for Russian fans to be anything but optimistic, but nobody could have expected the events that followed. It took just 12 minutes for defensive midfielder Yuri Gazinski to score the opening goal of the World Cup and fire Russia into the lead. As fans erupted in the stands, Vladimir Putin and Saudi monarch Mohammed bin Salman exchanged wry smiles in their seats. 10 minutes later, Alan Zagoev had to be subbed off after pulling his hamstring, a scene all too familiar for Russian fans. Zagoev's replacement was 27-year-old Villarreal midfielder Denis Cheryshev. A product of the Real Madrid youth setup, Cheryshev has never played a game of club football in Russia, and until the World Cup only had a handful of Russian caps to his name. Minutes before half-time, Cheryshev showed his class to the world, wiping out 2 Saudi defenders with a masterful touch before striking home from close range. With Russia coasting to victory, Fyodor Smolov was replaced by Zenit striker Artem Dzyuba at the 70th minute mark. Dzyuba, a typical target man with excellent hold-up play, had been banished by Roberto Mancini at Zenit, and had spent the latter half of the 17-18 season on loan at mid-table club Arsenal Tula. However, unbeknownst to everyone at the time, this substitution would change both Smolov and Dzyuba's respective careers. The 29-year-old giant made his presence felt immediately, scoring a header typical of his style of play. Dzyuba's celebratory salute became the defining moment of the World Cup for Russia, and an international phenomenon. It has been imitated by fans and players ever since. Denis Cheryshev made a fourth to Russia with a world-class finish from outside of his boot not long later, a goal his world-class ex-teammates from Real would have been proud of. 22-year-old midfielder Alexander Golovin put the icing on the cake with a perfect free kick in added time as Russia ran out 5-0 winners. Not even the most optimistic of fans would have expected this emphatic of a victory. 6 days later, the stage was set at the UFO-like Krestovsky Stadium in St. Petersburg for what was a must-win match for both sides. Mohamed Salah was by far the biggest threat for the Pharaohs, but on the day looked a pale imitation of the man who had broken the Premier League goal-scoring record just a couple of months previously. 2 minutes into the second half, Roman Zobnin broke the deadlock, striking a wayward shot from long range and watching on as it got bundled in mistakenly by Egyptian captain Ahmed Fatih. At the stroke of the hour, Denis Cheryshev nutmegged the Egyptian goalkeeper with a tap-in and sealed the victory for Russia. With his third goal in 2 games, Russia's Madridista had all but sent his home country to the knockout round of a World Cup for the first time since 1986. 3 minutes after the second goal, Artem Dzyuba received a long ball, controlled it beautifully with his right foot, took a touch, and fired it past the hapless Egyptian keeper. It was a special goal, but one that fans in St. Petersburg would see Dzyuba score on a near weekly basis over the next 2.5 years. Egypt did pull one back through a Salah penalty late in the match, but to Russian fans across the world there was nothing that could take away from a famous victory. With a game to spare, Russia were assured of a berth in the next round. With passage to the next round secure, Russia fielded a rotated team for their final group match against Uruguay and were duly defeated 3-0, not that anyone in Russia cared too much. Russia were aware of the fact that they were likely to face either Spain or Portugal in the next round, whatever the outcome, so it wasn't as if a result against La Celeste would have changed the world for them. Once results had come in from the other groups, the headline was written. Russia would play the 2010 World Cup champion Spain in the round of 16, the biggest game in their independent history since their semi-final against the same opposition a decade prior. Spain had fired manager Lopetegui just days before the World Cup, but they were still Spain. Looking to extinguish the ghosts of the 2014 World Cup, and with a squad with more stars than Hollywood, Spain were leagues ahead of Russia on paper. For footballing fans around the world, this was the moment where the Russians were expected to bow out of the tournament gracefully. They had impressed everyone by qualifying for the next round, but now a real team was here. For most fans, this match was simply a formality. The stage was set at the Luzhniki, and to begin with, things went exactly as expected. Sergei Ignashevich sent the ball into his own net after just 11 minutes, and it seemed as if a thorough beating was on the cards. Following the early goal, Spain looked comfortable and held on to possession in the way only a Spanish side can. Then, a rare Russian corner late in the first half resulted in Artem heading the ball onto Gerard Piqué's flailing hand. Penalty Russia. With ice in his veins, Dzyuba duly converted, sending David De Gea the wrong way and sending Russian fans into raptures with his trademark salute. For 49 minutes, Russia hung on for dear life, until they finally heard the reprieve of the final whistle. Following a short break, they faced a 30-minute Spanish onslaught before the referee ended the Spaniards' hopes of ending the tie in open play. Russia's fate would be decided by penalties, and having watched the players give it all for 120 minutes, there was a feeling of hope growing with every second that passed. Both sides scored their first two penalties before Igor Akinfeev gave the Russians the advantage, saving Koke's effort. Slowly, hope started turning to joy, as Russian fans began to dream of what had seemed impossible just 2 hours beforehand. Having scored all four of their efforts, Russia knew that the pressure was on Iago Aspas to score, or else Spain would be out of the World Cup. The Celta Vigo forward struck a shot with power towards the dead centre of the goal. For everyone in the stadium, time slowed down as Aspas' shot headed down the centre. Akinfeev had already committed to his right, and could only watch as the ball seemed to sail inevitably into his net. But sometimes it's the smallest of movements which make the difference. As the ball attempted to sail past him, Akinfeev's left foot was pulled to the ball, almost by the sheer hope of a nation, crashing into it and sending it well wide. Russia had done the impossible. Spain were out, and Russia were in the quarter-finals of the World Cup. After a disastrous World Cup in 2014, Akinfeev was Russia's hero. Scenes of jubilation erupted in all parts of Russia and the world, with fans in a state of pure euphoria, unable to comprehend the events which they had just witnessed. This makeshift, average group of players had just beaten Spain, and were through to the last 8 of the World Cup. With the quarter-finals against Croatia up next, Russian fans were in 7th heaven. The team had exceeded all expectations placed on them, and hurdled every obstacle placed before them. 31 minutes into the quarter-finals in Sochi, Denis Cheryshev scored one of the goals of the tournament, lobbing Daniel Subasic from over 20 yards out. And for just a little while longer, it seemed like the party was destined to continue. The following 8 minutes were probably the happiest in the life of any Russian football fan, as it looked like Russia were heading for an unthinkable semi-final berth. Then, Andrej Kramaric equalised for Croatia, and the 90 minutes ended with scores locked at 1-1. The Croats too had been taken to penalties in the previous round, meaning that both teams were facing the potential agony of another shootout. Croatia drew first blood in extra time as centre-back Vida headed in from a corner, but Russia weren't going out with a whimper. Mario Fernandes, the naturalised Brazilian who doesn't speak a word of Russian despite having spent over 8 years in the country, scored a glancing header with just 5 minutes left on the clock. Russia would not give up, and had another penalty shootout on their hands. However, this time, they couldn't keep up their 100% record, as both Fedor Smolov and Fernandes missed from the spot. Croatia were through, and though Russia had lost the quarter-final, the mood in the country was one of joy. Given the backdrop, Russia's unlikely heroes had defied all expectations. The squad had been ridiculed in the build-up to the tournament, and the weight of a nation had rested on their shoulders. But it was a weight that they carried with such pride that by their final battle, the nation that had once weighed them down was now carrying them aloft. As a team, all of Russia's players were awarded medals by Vladimir Putin for their exceptional performance, and now sit in the same corridors of history as the likes of Lev Yashin, Andrei Arshavin, and the great teams of the USSR. The tournament as a whole was an unbridled success for the country, and is now fondly remembered by fans all over the world. The 2018 World Cup was a reminder to the world of the footballing legacy that lives on in Russia, and it was a reminder that the world needed, maybe nobody more so than Russia herself. This video was inspired by an article by RFN's Neil Salata on Russia's unlikely heroes at the World Cup. RFN provided unparalleled, extensive coverage of the 2018 World Cup, teaming up with the Moscow Times to provide written content. To read more of this extensive coverage, head to the links in our description or go to RussianFootballNews.com.